All right, if you're anything like me, you hate running out of food on a trip. It's like a big fear, and so I'm a big fan of snacks during an adventure. And one of my absolute favorite go-to snacks are wonderful pistachios. You may be familiar with pistachios and the brand Wonderful Pistachios, but if you're not, they are one of the highest protein nuts out there. 1 ounce serving of Wonderful Pistachios is 6 grams of protein. That's 10% of your daily value. It also includes 9 essential amino acids, and they come with a ton of different flavors, varieties. There's a spicy version, there's lightly salted, there's no salted, there's so many, and every time I go on an adventure, I'm not even lying, I take an entire bag with me. And what's cool too, I love having the Wonderful Pistachio in shell, because then that almost gives me something to do and focus on as I'm paddling or biking through the really monotonous parts of the adventure. Every great adventure is going to have plenty of boring moments, and it's nice to have something to do and also something that is giving you some fuel, like Wonderful Pistachios. So they're one of my favorite adventure snacks, favorite road trip snacks, and definitely leave me feeling better than a lot of other snacks you can turn to. So if you want to learn more about how to fuel your next adventure with Wonderful Pistachios, go to wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. There's a song by Garth Brooks called The Cowboy Song, and there's the lyric in it that says, he's just chasing what he really loves and what's burning in his soul, wishing to God that he'd been born 100 years ago. And it's talking about cowboys and, feeling like you're out of place in life. And this story by Jesse McNeil, it reminds me of that, riding a horse across America, something that was far more doable. From an infrastructure point of view, probably a long time ago, as far as, traffic and whatnot and property not being so strict. But there are some probably benefits to having more modern capabilities and reliability on resupply and whatnot. But this story reminds me of a lot of our desires of wishing we could have seen the world before things were developed the way they are, or before certain areas were cleared or cut down or paved over. Because you got to remember, humans could only go as fast as the horse for thousands of years. That was the way we got around. And just up until relatively recently, we have gotten faster through automobiles and airplanes and trains. So today we are throwing the podcast back to 2021, where we sat down with Jesse to talk about what it was like. Jesse at the time, a carpenter, a commercial fisherman, dabbled in real estate, decided to buy an untrained horse, make himself into a horseman, and ride all the way across the U.S., from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean. And he's crossed the country before on moped, bicycle, even a small airplane. But this year, he wanted to do it on a living, breathing animal named Pepper. He goes into more detail about the story in his book, On the Hoof, which is out. Obviously, it's been out for a few years now. And even though probably 1 out of a million of you are ever going to do something like this, statistically speaking, all of us dream about getting on our horse and riding out into the sunset. I mean, what an amazing story. And I hope this inspires you to find something that you would like to do equally as impactful and equally as interesting. All right, let's ride. All right, folks, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. We've got an episode that I'm pretty excited about. There is a book that goes along with it that'll be out now, as you heard in the intro. But we're happy to introduce you to the show, Jesse Alexander McNeil, also known as Alexander McNeil. You might have met him as that out on the road. But Jesse, why don't you tell us about that what we were just talking about, that name distinction, and of course, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hey, thanks a lot, Mason. Really appreciate being here, and all your podcasts are really quite interesting, and I appreciate joining. So kind of like traveling, when you get out on the road or into the woods, some people adopt trail names as they go along. If they're on the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail, and that kind of becomes their identity. And for me, I still wanted to kind of keep my own existence but Alex is my middle name, and so I started going by Alex while I was on the horseback ride, as sort of a way of kind of pushing the envelope a little bit on my on my character, and I mean on my personality and how I felt. I wanted to kind of go into the world and kind of shed some of the old past a little bit. And so sometimes you go by your first name, you're always associated with what you did before and not where you're going to next. So that was my own little attempt to kind of go a little further for myself.
I've never heard of anyone doing that with their actual names, but I love that concept because you do anyone that hasn't done an adventure, maybe you listen to this show as like a way to explore what this would be like, but I think that's a big reason trail names exist is just you feel like such a different person out there. Like me personally, I feel like my like primitive, instinctual, and very tuned in version of me comes out, and then it gets put away, and I zip up my civilized self when I get back to quote normal life. I've never thought about doing something like that, but that would be. I think that should be a thing. What's your adventure name? Not just your trail name, but what's your adventure
Right.
name?
Right. Totally.
Because
Yeah.
it's
No.
with you too. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
not
And it's
something
not.
random that no one would call you. Some people might call you Alex, or at least they know that's your middle name.
Right, right, and it's on your driver's license in case you get into trouble.
There you go. Your parents, will call you by your middle name, or at least say it when you're, doing something wrong. Tell us about where you grew up and what you grew up doing, and how you started getting into these things. I'm always interested to know: was it something you discovered on your own, or were you encouraged to do it as a kid?
Well, I grew up in the country, so that definitely helps. I think for somebody getting out there into the mountains and into the forest, if they kind of come from that environment a little bit. But I grew up in the countryside in New Hampshire, and a small town of 2,000. And from there, I was definitely always in the outdoors, kind of running around as a kid. And then in high school, I got into backpacking and rock climbing, and just kept pushing the envelope on that, and into whitewater canoeing and into whitewater kayaking and rafting, and going into my 20s and guiding trips. Um, and then more into rock climbing, went abroad, climbed down in Australia and New Zealand for a year on rock climbing trips, and all across the U.S. And so, but I was always doing all these journeys by car, right? Most people go by car on a big road trip. And as I was wanting to travel further, or kind of more into the zone, I started to take different modes of transportation than just regular road trips. And that's kind of how it started to, and where all these unique ways of travel happened. And then it ultimately turned into this book I wrote about traveling by horse.
Well, you mentioned, it went from cars to wanting to do things via other means. What was it for you? Did you start doing backpack trips, or was it on bicycle? How did you pare down and then build back up to horses or a horse?
Well, I think I'm trying to think here. So I think the first long distance trip I did was I was finishing up college, and then yeah, that's what it was. A couple weeks after college, after I graduated, I went down to Springer Mountain in Georgia, like so many other people have, and started walking to Maine on the Appalachian Trail.
Oh yeah.
And I left on that trip about a week after graduation, and that made a lot of sense to me because I grew up in New Hampshire, and I'd been on the Appalachian Trail up in the White Mountains a lot, and so I knew that area, but I hadn't done hiking down in the South before. So it just that was a perfect starting, to traveling long distance, graduating college and just being done with all of like the book work and jobs, and just getting out for a little bit. and definitely had to do it on a shoestring. I didn't have a trust fund or anything, and so I earned a lot of money delivering pizzas prior to that to get out on the
Oh yeah.
trail for
Oh yeah.
5-6 months. So yeah, that's where it started. I think it started with like long distance backpacking on the Appalachian Trail, and that was from doing other multi-day and week-long backpacking trips during teenagers and college too.
Man, I tell you what, that's so relatable. So many of the same things uh, I would do. Scrubbing toilets before graduating college to take my gap year after graduation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, gap years are great. I did a couple gap years.
There you go. There you go. Oh, that's too funny. I did many gap years in a row. I love that. So, well, tell us about when you were on an adventure. At some point, you got the idea to do an adventure by horseback, or on a horse. Tell us about what did you experience, or what did you see, or what started planting that seed for you? Because that's a little bit unusual, I guess you could say, in today's adventure realm.
Yeah, totally. After the Appalachian Trail, I was out west on multiple rock climbing trips going out west, and ended up settling on one of them trips up in the San Juan Islands north of Seattle. So I had a great time out there. The islands are super beautiful, great for hiking and sailing, on kayaking. And I did a trip from there to go back to my home state in New Hampshire, to see my mom, actually, because she was still living at work at the house I grew up in. And so I hopped on a just for kicks. And again, I didn't have a lot of money. So money seems to be the kind of like what like leads your experience. And so I bought a little moped, and I just started mopeding back to New Hampshire, because I just thought that would be kind of fun and novel, and it didn't cost that much in gas either.
Pretty fuel efficient.
And yeah, I think I spent about $52 in gas
That is
to go
crazy.
to go from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean.
What was that like? I mean, that's an adventure. You're not going very fast, are you?
No, it was slow. It was like, I think I was going about 22 miles an hour. And then I got kind of sick of how slow I was going. And I was getting up into the mountains, and I stopped in Montana, and I found this moped shop that did like retrofits. And so I was able to get a bigger exhaust on the moped. So that allowed me to go like 26 miles an
I mean,
hour.
over the
So,
course of the country, that'll make a few days difference, I'm
oh
sure.
yeah, I was like flying at that point.
Hold
Uh,
on, hold on. We're going
yeah,
26.
yeah, it was this really flashy exhaust on this like little junky moped. It made no sense.
What'd your mother think? You pull up to the house in that thing?
Oh, she was just like, well, I think she was really concerned because I was always next to the side of the road, and like, you gonna be okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm totally fine. I got lights on, because I was wearing a backpack, and I had a gas tank strapped to the back, and then I had a little like crazy creek wrapped around the moped gas tank. Just I mean, I brought with me as much as I could, but still it wasn't a great deal. And so it all kind of worked. I felt a little kind of protected in some ways if something did go sideways. So
Like the moped.
yeah, it was a pretty desperate attempt to be Easy Rider.
This poor moped was like, I wasn't built for this. Please,
No,
please help.
no,
Oh my gosh, that sounds like a few Adventure Sports podcast episodes right there. That whole
yeah.
adventure. So,
Uh,
so at some point, you wanted to go even slower, I presume.
so yeah, so then after that, getting a, I ended up moving back to New Hampshire for a couple of years, and started building a house, and just kind of went down that road for a bit. But then I was going to go back out west, and I bought a motorcycle, and I went back out west on a motorcycle. And so that was no, is that how it, well, somewhere in there it is. So I went back on a motorcycle, and then I'm back on the West Coast, and I and then I ended up selling the land I had back in New Hampshire and kind of cashed out on that, and I was able to get my pilot's license. So I bought a little airplane, learned how to fly it, and then I flew that back to New Hampshire. And ironically, with that trip, that was like took as long as the moped because there was so much weather in the way, and I always had to land because of clouds. And that was like way more expensive, like same length of time, but it cost me like $1,500 in gas. So it's just like I could have taken the moped, for the way cheaper in the same amount of time. But it was really fun. It was just, I mean, you got to be aware, and you're going over the mountains in a little 100 horsepower airplane, so you got to leave early and make sure the weather's clear and know how high the mountains are. And so I learned a lot on that one for sure. So, wow. And I actually picked up a friend. So I convinced a friend of mine who I actually met on the Appalachian Trail who was living in Boise at the time. I said, "Hey, Arizona Jeff, you should like fly to Seattle, and then I'll pick you up, and then I'll deliver you back to Boise." He's like, well, what are we doing? And so I can't tell you that, but get to Seattle, and I'll pick you up, and we'll fly back we'll get back to Boise. So I pick him up in the airplane, and he's just like, "What the hell? Like, where'd you get this?" I'm like, "Oh, I just started learning how to fly." And so we like got all kind of situated and spent a couple days in the San Juans, and then we started flying to Boise. And the reason I wanted him to come along was that I wanted somebody to read the maps as we're going over the mountains. And so, but the charts are a little different than like regular, like maps you'd have for backpacking. And so he's looking at the charts. He's like, "I don't really understand all this." I'm just like pointing to him to like, "Just read me that number, or read me this number." And at one point we're starting to go up over the mountains, and I look at, I'm like, "Man, this is crazy, Jeff." He's like, "What's so crazy?" He's like, I'm like, "I've never been this high in an airplane before." And we were at like 4,000 feet. I just never, during practice training was always 2,000 feet, So I'm like, "I've never been this high in an airplane before." And he's just like, "God, I wish you didn't tell me this stuff as we're doing it,
You're flying through the air on the moped of airplanes.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly
that can be a scary place to be.
That's exactly it.
Oh, my, over the Rocky Mountains. Good gracious.
Over the Cascades.
Over the Cascades. Oh, yeah. Geez, even more jagged, honestly.
Yeah, to Boise, and then from there it was over the Rockies into Montana.
What a beautiful views, I'm sure, over the Cascades in particular. Good gracious.
Yeah, very pretty.
Oh my gosh, that is wild. So at some point you met Pepper, your horse. Tell us where did that? I mean, you've got this fascination with taking different mediums across the country back to New Hampshire to see your mom, apparently, and a horse was, is this going to be one of more, or is this kind of where it was all leading to, was horse on the horse?
I think it was all like ultimately leading to it, because once I was on the horse trip, that made sense to me. Like that just brought it all home. It was very, very basic and like traditional. And so how that came about was I ended up then flying back to the West Coast later on, like a year later. So how I got into the horse trip was I then, like a year after that, I got a bicycle, and then I started bicycling across Canada. And so I was bicycling across Canada, and that's when I met a horse on the trip that made me think about getting a horse to take riding. And I had this one moment that really like set the tone. And I was bicycling across Saskatchewan, and it was like really windy out, big headwind, and it's just desolate prairie everywhere. And I kept bicycling on this quiet road into this headwind, and I came alongside this ranch, and off to the right there was this one horse that was in a field, and his mane was getting all blown back, and his tail's going up, and he was like leaning against the fence, and he wanted to like he was watching me like dead eyes, watching as I'm inching my way into the headwind. And I looked back at him, and I was like, that's it. I need to be on a horse, like that's gonna be way more interesting than being on this bicycle. So I kept bicycling and kept going across Canada and around Maine and into the Bay of Fundy, and bicycling down the Maine coast and to New Hampshire, and got home to family homestead, and but the whole time I'm thinking about this horse that I saw in Saskatchewan. And so when I end up going back to the West Coast, I then started organizing for a horse trip.
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. Are you looking to sell anything at all online? Well, I would advise you to look into Shopify. They are a global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. I use Shopify every day at my day job. It has been with us since our company was a tiny little team all the way up to where we are today, one of the biggest breweries in the country. Whether you're auctioning off autographed apparel, selling sleek skis, or selling non-alcoholic beer like we are at Athletic Brewing, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. From their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their personal POS system, wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify has got you covered. We manage a podcast, a blog, all that right there on our Shopify store. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S. and has extensive help resources whenever you're dealing with an obstacle. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ASP, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ASP for Adventure Sports Podcast now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/ASP. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode. That's amazing. You knew right then that you were a horse person for this experience, at least.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about it. I was just so curious. I was like, I don't know anything about horses, It's like, but that's what to do, If you're going across like the country, you should go on a horse.
You want a horse, and I guess you learn how as you go. You learn some basics, but you really learn a lot as you go. Well, tell us what was the idea and what were you starting out to do?
Well, I don't like to plan trips too much, and so I knew I needed to get a horse. I could go that far in planning,
at least.
And so I had to at least get a horse. And so I went up to Alaska, and I was commercial fishing for the summer to come up with enough money to go buy a horse. And so I came back and I started researching what I was at the time. I was living in Montana, so I went back to Montana. I figured that'd be a good place to get a horse, and so I took a couple books out of the Bozeman Library and on basically like how to ride a horse. And so I was just like, okay, this is it, just how to. And then I started going around Bozeman and the other towns, like checking out horses that were for sale. And so I thought it'd be kind of like buying a car, like you just kind of go and check out the horse and like kick the tires, and
yes.
Just to see what you think. But I realized first time I turned up at this ranch to go check out this horse that I knew nothing about horses. And so he's like, well, what do you think? And he like brings the horse out, and I'm like looking at it, and I'm like, well, how old is he? I'm like thinking about age, like how old's a car, and I'm like wanting to kind of pick up the horse's feet to look at the hooves, and
right.
But yet I didn't know how to do it, and now I've learned you basically lean into the horse, you get the horse to go off balance, and then you snatch the hoof and bring it up, and do it with like authority, and the horse will yield to that. But at the time I didn't, and so I would just kind of like look at the hooves on the ground, like, oh, those look like good hooves.
Yeah,
but
plenty of miles
I didn't
left
know.
on them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so I end up like not. So I looked at all these different horses and different breeds, and I dialed in on a Tennessee Walker. And the reason I came in on that particular breed was because there's two kinds of horses. There's gated horses and non-gated horses. And a non-gaited horse is like a quarter horse or saddlebred, and it's basically a horse that's just that will have a normal 4 beat gallop to it. Well, I'm not sure if I have all this correct. It's been a little bit since I read about it, but a gaited horse, when it goes into a trot, it will be a more even keeled trot. It's not a big up and down jolting experience, which you would have to post, like going up and down in the saddle. That's another skill you have to learn or ride the horse, is you got to post up and down at the same time in timing with the horse. And since I didn't know much about riding at all, I didn't grow up riding or anything. So I thought, well, if I get this other kind of horse, this gaited horse, a Tennessee Walker, I don't have to learn how to post, and it should be like a little more of a comfortable ride. And so then I started looking at Tennessee Walkers, and after about the third one, I found Pepper, and I was like, this is it. She didn't know much either. She's a young horse, and I was like, well, this is kind of good. I can be the first owner, and we can like learn together.
There you go. An airplane probably seems like the most preparation, because you got to get a license and all that, and there's a lot to know there. But a horse seems right up there as far as complexity of understanding what you're doing, just because you're dealing with another living creature. It's not just a machine that's complicated. It's a being, and that takes, I'm sure, some totally different dynamics, especially compared to something like the bicycle or even the moped. What was it like? What did you have to do with Pepper as far as understanding, and what were maybe some of the first few weeks out on the road like?
Well, I came to realize that I was basically always learning. Like it wasn't like, oh, well, let's get kind of trained up here over a couple of weeks or a month or so, and then we'll be all set. I was constantly learning. And so I ended up getting Pepper in December, and I trained with her till mid-March. So we did about 3 months of training, and I would go out to the stable that I kept her at. I'd go out there every day, regardless of what kind of snow or wind was going on. This is up in Montana. So sometimes we had big blizzards going on, but I'd still go out and just, I just figured if we're going to do this out traveling, we might as well get started here. And it was I think we were kind of nervous of each other the whole time at the beginning. We didn't really know each other well enough, and so it was very tentative. We'd kind of test each other, but we were kind of kept this respectful, like arm's length distance about how to interact. And she would definitely like let me put a saddle on her and pick up her feet. But even then, I'm still learning. I'm still new at it, and so I would just do a little thing, like one thing at a time. Like I'd have like, okay, today's lesson is just like going into a arena with her and try to like ride her around the arena 10 times, in some sort of controlled fashion and not fall off. I mean, that's how basic it was. Like, and if that happened, then it was like, great, we're good, we're done for the day. I always tried to end on a positive note. I definitely treated Pepper like a dog. Like I treated it like this is dog training, because that's what I had played around with dog training when I was a kid in 4-H, and I think and that was my only like connection to like some large animal that I would have to try to control. And so I think the more I did that, it actually worked out pretty good, by because then you're not so nervous, and because horses pick up on people's sensitivities so quickly. They'll take advantage of the situation quite fast if they know that somebody's nervous or is backing up or is threatening, and they'll back off. And so you're not getting then like an authentic like connection when either they feel like they need to take control or they feel like they have to hide, that they have to defend themselves. And so kind of being at one with the animal, it was really key. But it took a lot of practice, because to be around 1,000-pound animal when you've never done that, you got to build up that confidence yourself.
What were some of the logistics of making this happen initially? I mean, are you just walking on the side of the road? Are you sticking to, smaller roads or dirt roads, or how are you navigating across the country through a system of roads that aren't built for horses?
Yeah, it's definitely, it would have been way easier 100 years ago, right?
Right.
A lot less roads and fences out there. Well, probably just as many fences, but a lot less roads. I pretty much just set a compass bearing and I just shot east. I literally just went east, and if it was over the mountains, it was over the mountains. If it was through the desert, it was through the desert. If it was alongside a highway that, like, I could feel like we could handle to be on, you know, or then it was alongside a highway. So people's backyards. I mean, it was literally like you just shot a compass line. And so I left from southern Oregon coast in Brookings, Oregon, which is about a mile north of the California border. And I left from there because I wanted to go just a little further south than leaving up, say, around Bellingham, Washington. I was leaving in mid March, and I knew in mid March at that time, I'd still be dealing with a lot of snow. So by leaving a little further south was going to be better weather for departing, less snow, and it was also, I knew, so that was the plan there, and I figured it would be kind of a straighter shot because then it would be coming just below the Great Lakes. So I'd go just south of Chicago and then turn at an angle up to New Hampshire at that point. That was actually an interesting point when I eventually did turn away from going due east. So I would spend many months going due east, and then all of a sudden my compass bearing shifted, and that was like kind of a big moment. But yeah, that's how I planned it. I photocopied Gazetteer Atlas maps and laminated them and bundled them up into 2 or 3 states at a time, and had a couple people send them to me along the way. And so I would just look at the maps and I'd shoot a compass bearing, and that was it. I did have a GPS as like an emergency backup and also to record distance. I was really trying to be careful to not put too much mileage in each day, like unknowingly, because it's easy to keep going with the miles because horses don't tell you that they're done. They'll just keep riding and riding and riding, and
Wow.
and so you gotta you need breaks, and that was a lesson that it took me a couple times to learn was when to stop because
I'm looking
my
at this
yeah.
route that you went, just over the California Oregon line, just right there. There is not a lot out there. Just when you look at the map and all the way over to Idaho, then you're crossing Wyoming and parts of Nebraska and Iowa. What
Hmm.
were you experiencing? What was some of the challenges or some of the things you were seeing? That's a lot of terrain. Like that's an epic
Yeah.
series of mountain ranges and deserts even to get through. That's legendary terrain out there for some very well known or expeditions.
Yeah, it was actually in a lot of ways I did the hard part first, which made it even harder, because we hadn't learned to get along yet. We hadn't got a schedule dialed in yet. We hadn't got strong enough yet, and so we left from the Pacific Ocean and immediately went right into the mountains. We went up into the Siskiyou Coastal Range, and immediately we're like crossing rivers and streams and going up ridges and down ridges. And the first 5, 6 days, I think I covered only like 30 miles in like 6 days. The first the
Jeez.
first chunk, and it was just, I mean, there was one day I think we did a quarter mile in an hour or two, maybe 2 hours. It just like it was so thick with like brush and finding our way through and super steep. And then there was burned out forest to deal with, and which makes the ground really like like hazard filled with pepper post holding through because of like broken down stumps that were burned out. And so and there's nobody there. There's no roads there. There's nothing there. And
Wow.
so we just jumped into the fire right at the very beginning, and that was a little bit unknowingly because I was initially going to be going a little further north, up the coast and then in, but we had such a long drive from Montana with the horse trailer that ended up being a really slow drive. And so in the evening, I ended up getting let off at a different spot that I chose about 30 miles before I was initially gonna be dropped off. And I told the driver, I'm like, hey, let's just stop here. This is crazy. It's like 10:30 at night. Let's just stop here. I can get into the mountains from this river right here. It's called the Windchuck River Range. And I was like, I can get in from here. And so he dropped me off and he's all right, have a good day. And there we are, like the horse and me and a pile of gear side the road at 10:30 at night. And just wondering, okay, what did I get? Here we go. This is it. And so I dragged all the stuff down to like a wooded beach area and made camp down there and started sorting through all the gear and started to pack Pepper up. And I had not actually even packed her for the first time yet. You know how you like pack your backpack before
Oh yeah.
you
Yeah.
go up. Well, I'd done so much backpacking that I kind of treated that part like it wasn't necessary. And so when I eventually packed Pepper's saddlebags all up, it was just this catastrophe of a arrangement that I had going on with her. And ropes were all tied in different directions. And I was like, okay, I think everything is on, like it was a pretty funny affair. And so I took her down to the beach, like, oh, let's walk around. And we walked 100 feet onto the beach, and right then I turned around, the rope went tight, and I turned around, and the whole affair had flipped around on her and is
Oh
hanging
geez.
upside down under her belly. And I was just like, holy moly, like, and I'm looking at her thinking she's gonna freak out, and she's just looking at me like, what are you doing? And
Right.
so I had to take the whole thing apart and drag it all back to the camp again and take her back and repack again. And so it took about actually a day and a half to get that sorted out and felt right, that it was going to be in a controlled way, that we were going up into the mountains, not like total yard sealing ourselves up there. So
My
but yeah, that
goodness.
was the beginning. That was the beginning of the trip, the first week. So
What was there anything you came across early on that felt either impassable or an obstacle that really challenged you? I know the whole thing is a challenge, big obstacle, honestly, but anything in particular?
Well, I think actually it was about the fourth day in that there was a river crossing, that I had gone up the river and down the river, and I'm looking at other places to go, and I realized like the only way to keep going east is to forge across this river. And I'm looking at the river, and I from my kayak and raft guide days, I'm like, okay, I figure I can go in through here and across here, but it's like, how am I going to bring a horse? How is this going to work? And and the water didn't look that deep, but it was fast, and it's out in the wilderness. And so if something goes wrong, there's like nobody to save you or even know where you are. Because I didn't have a spot or any of the GPS little equipment with me. I never used that. um, so that was the first thing. So when I made that commitment to cross this river, it was like, I'm gonna keep going, because I don't to come back was even more hazardous. And so I ended up stripping down, and I had one end of the rope tied to Pepper, and I had the other end. I'm holding onto the other end, and I just jumped in and started swimming across. And I got over to the shallow spot after getting pushed downstream a bit, and Pepper's looking at me, and I give her a tug, and she starts walking across. And I was like, okay, this is it. We're committed now. And you know, put my clothes back on, and we started going up the next mountain range. And I was like, we're in it now. There's no turning back now. So and at that point, that was really awesome, because that like showed a bonding between horse and I. You know, Pepper and I seemed to really kind of get each other at that point. You know, because she was going to be like my lifeline in case something went wrong. So it was a rope was attached to her.
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode. Man, what an experience. Y'all had been through it at that point, or at least, forming those very strong ties early on, because I'm sure you'd need it every day. Was there any concern, or tell me about this? Actually, I want to ask about this. What was it like to camp with Pepper? What was the process there, and was it just pretty simple, or something that was challenging compared to doing trips on your own?
It was at first I thought that was going to be fairly easy, but horses have a unlimited need for food, and so they'll.
Yeah,
So I
and
would
what
out.
did you do about that?
So it's exactly. At first, I thought I could just forage wherever, and Pepper would have enough food that way. But as I soon learned, as like after the first month, it's like, wow, we need to really supplement this with more hay if I can get someone to come close to a town or to a ranch. So I'd start like looking out for hay, and then later on, it's like, okay, we need to really start to add in more grain too. And so I started getting rid of my own stuff to pack more grain that so she could eat more. And that ended up being a really crucial part of the journey too, was changing that up. But in regards to to camping with horses, basically I always had to make sure wherever I tied her to that she wouldn't get wrapped around nearby trees, or sagebrush or fence posts. And so I had this 50-foot rope that I basically just tied her to, just like a dog. And and I'd knock a aluminum picket in the ground, and hopefully out in the field, and then she can just graze in the big circle and not get tied around anything. When we're in the woods, I'd have to tie up the rope short to a tree and then keep moving her from tree to tree so that she can keep grazing on like the brush and the grass that's around. Or even just in the middle of the night, have to move her again. Sometimes she would find a way to get wrapped around a tree. So I'd wake up a couple times a night and have to go check on her. So in the end, it was definitely easier to be out in fields or go to ranches or people's backyards where it's open and grassy. And but that wasn't always the case. In the desert, I basically looked for the largest sagebrush I could find, and I would tie her to that, because the roots on those are so much deeper than the aluminum picket that I would knock in the ground with a rock, which in like crackly dry ground would often it would be easy to pull out. So the sagebrush was a key, but then she'd get twisted around other sagebrush. So sometimes I'd go riding around in the desert to try to find a spot that would work for us overnight.
That's one thing when you're out west and you have that space. What were some of the challenges as you got closer to home with either, I'm sure that was pretty lush, maybe a little more greenery, but more congested too, especially around places like Chicago.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely the further east you got, the less public space and the more private property signs. But ironically, actually, one of the worst private property areas that I deal with, it was in eastern Wyoming. The way the layout of fences were and people's property, I kept getting pushed onto highways around that area, and so that always made it pretty dodgy to be going along a highway with cars going by at 80 miles an hour. But the further east I got, it was basically hard to find a spot that you weren't like getting called by the cops.
Right.
Because
there's a horse in my yard.
Yeah, there's a horse in my yard, or there's like a horse in the park, and it's like, I don't, and then the park ranger would turn up, and I'm like, what, a horse is not allowed here? Like, well, they are, but they never come around, so that's why the cops are called again. Sorry about this, and you're gonna have to keep moving. Like, we're gonna keep getting calls by the locals about you being here. And but then other people would come up and they'd be all excited and bring their kids and want to pet the horse. So you're constantly on parade, is what it felt like.
I was
And you
gonna
had
say, I'm sure you felt like
Yeah,
just an anomaly across
yeah,
everything you went to.
yeah. And so in the evenings, I'd actually try to find a spot to camp before town, out in the fields, out in some field like a cornfield or something on the edge of a cornfield that might be close to a stream or a creek, and just camp, kind of stealth camp in the woods with a horse. And then in the morning, I could ride into town, get coffee, and get some grain for pepper or hay or something from the supply store, or a nearby farm, and then keep going. Because if I end up in town that night, I might find a place to camp with the horse, but it was, off in the middle of the night, some cop car would come around, and there'd be lights on my tent, asking why there's a horse next to me. And so, and
Right.
so, and so I'd be like, oh, I didn't see a sign that horses aren't allowed here. Like, well, we just don't know what's going on here. So I get your license and registration. I'm not driving a car. Like,
Right.
oh my God.
What do you feel like the experience taught you as you started approaching the end? What did you feel? Did you feel like you went out and achieved what you were trying to achieve in every aspect?
Yeah, I think I did. It took me a long time though. I thought I'd have it dialed in the first month or month and a half. Like, from what I've learned in the past is that the first 2 weeks of like any new trip is always going to be the hardest. So I figured with this one, like after the first month, I'll get it kind of dialed in. Well, after a month, I'd actually, it took a whole month to go across Oregon, and I'd done 600 miles across Oregon, and I still
Wow.
didn't feel like I knew what was going on. I felt like every day was desperate. I felt like Pepper was getting more and more tired. I was getting more and more anxious and not like short tempered. And I was like, man, this is hard. This is gonna take me a lot longer to figure out than I thought. And then after I did another 1,200 miles by horseback, and then I trained Pepper to a cart to pull me, so she'd be in a single horse cart, like they call it a sulky, and I would sit in the back. It looked like a bit like a ski chair lift with two wheels attached, and I drove her from Nebraska to Pennsylvania. And so that kind of like, so the whole trip took a whole new left turn, with like learning a whole new way of doing things. So I felt like I was just constantly learning and forced to like how to deal with like taking Pepper down the side, a busy road in a cart with tractor trailers going by that I couldn't see until they were coming up alongside me. And it's like, and everybody was in like where I could like stop her for the moment and try to get in between other cars, and it was just really, it was constantly like a constant test. Every day was a test. And I think I don't. Then eventually I got her back into the saddle because it got too hilly in Pennsylvania, and we took a month off at that point because Pepper really needed a month to like just be out in the field and like fatten up a bit, because we were working a lot of miles. And so it wasn't until I was probably in the middle of Pennsylvania that I started to get it. That I started to become more patient, and I understood that it wasn't just about me. It was about Pepper's happiness, and how Pepper was going along, and how we should get along, and just patience was huge. And then after a while, I didn't even feel like I needed to go to the ocean anymore. I didn't want to. I was like, there was no point to go to finish. I could just keep riding out, and just take a left turn, and go up to Canada. And just like it was nice. It was the feeling of the destination wore away, and I just actually enjoyed being out there. But it took a good 3,000 miles to figure that out.
Hey, if you got the time and you got the ability to put in the miles, it's a great way to figure things out. Uh, to me, being out there on an adventure. Well, tell us what folks could expect with reading the book. What can they expect to learn from you and learn from the book, and where are they going to be able to find it once it comes out?
Yeah, so the book is called On the Hoof: Pacific to Atlantic, a 3,800 mile adventure. and it's going to be available on Amazon, but it'll also be available in bookshelves. In bookstores all around. It's put out by a great press called Trafalgar Square Press, that have done other equine-based books, but it's also kind of a good crossover read. It's not just about horseback riding. It's really an adventure book. So it's traveling with a horse is definitely the mode, but it's not. It's really adventure and soul seeking and kind of being comfortable in your own shoes and not meeting your goals. You don't always meet your goals, and how to deal with that. And so it'll be available in August 5th. So August 5th, it should be available on Amazon and anywhere else. So definitely check it out. And you can also check out, I have a Facebook page called On the Hoof. Also, jessymcneil.com shows links on there on how to buy the book directly or to the Facebook page. And I did a Facebook page while I was on the journey, so there's a lot of photos on there and people that I met along the way. And one thing we didn't talk about, which was absolutely critical, was the people that I met along the way. If it wasn't for all the kind people and even the stern ones that were like, "What are you doing?" I wouldn't have learned as much, because you don't travel alone. It might be a solo journey, but you don't really travel alone. So
I hate it for the people that don't know that. If you're listening to this show and you have a negative perspective on the world and on people, put yourself out there in the middle of nowhere doing something. Adventure breaks down barriers. It really does, especially when you have a medium as cute as Pepper, where it's like, or as approachable as Pepper, where it's like, oh my God, this guy's on a horse. I need to talk to him. I haven't seen someone ride through our town on a horse ever. I've got to know what's going on.
Totally. I went up into an old mining ghost town up in Idaho, and I rode up into this rundown mining town that had like a few people that would still live up there in the summer. And I'm riding up on Pepper, and they're like, they all turn around and look at me. They're having a barbecue, and they're like, "Oh my God, we haven't seen a horse ride into town in a long time." And it just kind of set the whole new tone. And horses definitely become like quick ambassadors to bonding with strangers.
Oh man, I love it. It's that's adventure. The bicycle will do the same thing. I guarantee you a moped will do it. And I promise you a small engine plane will do the same thing too.
Right.
No hesitation there for folks wanting to come up to you. You're the anomaly of their day, that's for sure. But
yeah, and you are for them too, because sometimes they're the only person I saw for the whole day after riding through the desert, And so it was like, as much as they enjoyed seeing me, I enjoyed seeing them, and it was even nicer when they had a water spigot nearby.
They're in some grass. That's awesome. Well, Jesse, this has been absolutely fantastic. Is there anything else you want to share before you head out, or is it just tell people to get the book?
Yeah, just go out and get the book, and we're definitely gonna keep putting more updates on Facebook and on my website, and so I'm sure there'll be other adventures to come. And there's a lot of wonderful people out there. So the only way you'll get to meet them is if you get out there.
Oh, that's awesome. Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining the show, and we'll be in touch when it comes out.
Cool. Thanks, Mason. Appreciate the time.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to this show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to growing the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.